Um, I never knew my father's parents. Uh, Father came from a family that was short-lived, and his the whole family, the two older brothers and a younger brother, and no girls in the family. And his mother died 3 months after I was born to the day, so I didn't know her. She knew I'd arrived, but that's all. And his father died long before that, and later on, two brothers died in their 40s, maybe one was 50. Short life, heart troubles. So I can't tell you much about them, except that from what I know, his father came from a farm in upstate New York. He was able to make money he was allowed to make money by collecting the sap from the maple bush, from the maple trees that were not in the maple bush. That meant taking a sled and big cans of barrels of stuff to collect that sap that came from those maples. And then he could sell that as maple syrup or maple sugar, and he could keep that money. The maples that were in the sugar bush, where you only went to one spot and you didn't have to carry it very far, that was off limits for him. The other way he earned money was to play clarinet in Chautauqua, which was going back then. And he played a clarinet, which I don't know where he learned how to play it, but he learned. And he had a little band, and he organized them, and they all rode horseback or took the wagon down to Chautauqua, which was only maybe 10 miles away. And they'd play for the visitors and dance and so on, and then come home. So that gave him enough money so that when he finished high school, he took off with what money he had and came to Cleveland and went to college, worked his way through college, and then law school, or at least he worked with a lawyer. I'm not sure which it was. In those days, you didn't have to go to law school. You could learn from a lawyer, and then he'd give you some kind of a certificate that said you knew the law.
And what time frame is this, Grandma, roughly?
Well, my father was born in 1897 or 8, I'm not sure which. 98 probably. And he was the third son. His wife was Elizabeth Hay, who came from a big family in Meadville, Pennsylvania, which was just over the border from New York State. It was that end of Pennsylvania. They set up shop in Cleveland. I think it was, it must have been
It's getting dark. That's what I was thinking.
let me get, oh, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So now I can see you again.
Right, okay. Where was I? I think it must have been the early part of the 20th century. When Father was born in 1898 or whatever it was. I think Mother was born in 1897. I'm not sure. I might get those twisted. But Becky says that she was older by a few months. Am I not loud enough?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
No, you're good.
So, Father, all the boys grew up, and the house was still standing when I was growing up. I would be driven by. It was on Prospect Avenue, right down near the center of town. You could walk to the center of town. It was where the boardwalk ended, is essentially the way it was described. The boardwalk being the sidewalk that came out from the center of town, and at the end of it, you got down on the ground or mud or whatever it was, a muddy road. But this was inside, and they all went to public school, the 4 boys. The oldest was a teacher in World War I for the military. He graduated from high school at 14. He finished some kind of law degree in about 2 or 3 more years. So they always talked about how he went off to college still in knickers. That was what little boys wore, or people who played golf. But other than that, he wore long pants. He never married, and I can barely remember him as being sort of interesting. He was a genius. He wrote music, he played music, he played the piano, he wrote a whole operetta at one time. I don't know where it is now, but, and of course he went through school in no time flat. The next brother was Harvey, and Father's older brother by just a year. So they shared a bedroom at Prospect Home. Harvey went off to college and got himself kicked out of 2 different colleges. So eventually, after this, the ultimatum was handed down. He was going to go to Mount Vernon,
Kenyon College.
Kenyon.
Wow.
And he'd better behave himself. So he behaved himself and finished college in 3 years.
That was, what was his name?
Harvey.
Right.
And he married a nurse when he went to medical school, and married a nurse whom Father disliked, felt strongly about, because he brought her home and he was displaced in his bedroom, and I don't know what else. He had really high blood pressure and knew it, being a doctor. I visited there when I was about 7, and they had 2 girls, just a little bit older. The oldest was a bit older than I, and the youngest was a bit older than Becky, a little bit younger than I. And I visited the home, and it was a penthouse on one of the top buildings in Detroit, and they didn't have silverware, they had gold cutlery and very fancy rugs, dishes, pictures, and you could go out on the garden and walk around the top of the building, and it was all planted and beautiful. It was unbelievable, but of course there was no money left over. Harvey was using up all the money he made as fast as he made it, and when he died in about 40, and Father was told he would die before about 40, same thing. And the father had died much later than that. I don't know exactly how late, but probably in his 50s sometime, of heart disease. Father, I can remember pacing the floor trying to figure out what to do about Harvey's family. And of course, by this time, Father knew that he was probably going to have the same thing happen to him. And I think he finally decided he just couldn't help. He couldn't burden Mother with May, who we didn't like anyway, and who had no intellectual interests. She was a nurse. And 2 more girls in the family. And with the fact that he was very likely to wind up not being around to help. So they kind of went their own way. I always felt bad about it. At the time, I remember thinking it'd be fun to have cousins living with us, but it didn't happen. His other brother was younger, Uncle Jack, whom you knew.
Is that Mac?
Jack, John Hay. They all had the middle name Hay, which was Elizabeth Hayes, maiden name, and they went Alton, Harvey, William, and John. John married Aunt Ruth, who just died recently, a year or 2 ago. They never had any children, so there were only 2 cousins, no no aunts except by marriage. That was my father's family. And my mother's family was even smaller. Becky thinks very highly of her natural father because she's read all the papers that came down. He was German. His name was Stossmeister. And he was a big, hulking, handsome guy. And Becky, from reading those letters, thinks that he was quite a leader. And she's found out more about him than anybody told me. Mother would never tell me anything about him, except that he'd gone off on the Alaskan gold rush in order to make the fortune that he was going to bring back for Grace, Mother's mother, and the little girl, Alice, who was on the way, but Mother never hadn't seen it before. And he didn't make it. He didn't make the fortune. He survived barely, and we were told that he was sickly when he came back. But Becky found out later that he had died somewhere in the 60s in California, had remarried, and I don't know, maybe he even had another family. But I don't know what happened. She put that together from the internet or from something. So I never knew him. I knew grandmother, and she divorced her second husband. While Stossmeister was off digging for gold, grandmother was raising this daughter she had and making do by running a boarding house in Ann Arbor, Michigan for the students. And a lot of the students would sign up and be in a boarding house. They'd have meals taken care of and a roof over their heads. And there she met Merritt C. McNeil, who was a promising young man who was definitely going to make money and stick around. And I'm sure he was very fond of Mother, who must have been a very pretty, cute little girl. So they married. I don't know, the first marriage was declared not illegal or not finished. My grandmother was furious about that because that made Mother a bastard child if the marriage wasn't considered real. Anyway, they traveled all over. Mother never finished high school. She, Mac, grandfather, was that age is, efficiency expert. You know, they had people who ran those things and they'd come in and advise and so on. Well, he would move from one town to another, one company to another, and he'd set up their production line and all the equipment that they'd need to make whatever they were doing. And once that was done, he'd move on to another company. I don't know how, he must have had an agent or something to set it up. But at any rate, that's what he did. And as a result, Mother was never in one school long enough to get all the credentials together that were required for a diploma. So she went off to college in Cleveland without the high school diploma, but she was a very good student, liked and was liked by Raymond Moley, who was what was
brain truster of FDR,
Oh,
President
Okay.
Roosevelt.
and he taught at Western Reserve University.
We have a book on Ray Moley up there in the,
I never paid attention to that. Okay. Oh, that's what that book is. I've seen that.
Yeah. And so she, before she got to college, she had an appendicitis, and they didn't know about what to do about that very well, even in Cleveland, but there was some kind of an expert in New York who, somewhere down after about a week or several days, they brought him in overnight on the train, and he operated on her and removed the appendix. But she had a lot of complications from that and health problems. She wasn't even sure she could ever have children because of all this. So she sort of danced around and played around for a while. When she finished college, she had a bowl out in California, and she had friends here and there, and she drove through the Dust Bowl in the, whenever it was, the late 20s, some bad day or two in a Dust Bowl, and that was the beginning of her allergies that you know about. And she finally decided that the person who would be a good father for her children would be Bill Bemis. So, and he was unbelievably handsome. My little friends in elementary school, like second or third grade, would see him and say, "Oh, he should be a movie actor. He's supposed to." And I thought he was much handsomer than any movie actor I knew or seen on the screen. And he made jokes, and he was a practical joker about some things. But he came into the law firm of Baker, Hostetler, Patterson through Newton D. Baker, who was really his mentor. And it just happened that I was born on Newton's birthday. So I remember being taken the last 2 or 3 times. I think he died when I was about 7 or 8, somewhere in there. But we went to his house to exchange presents at Christmas time, or on birthdays. And Father did well, and then sometime, I don't know when it happened, but sometime he was told that he had high blood pressure and he was very likely to die by 40 or 41 years old, something like that. Same thing that had happened to, did turn out to happen. I think Father knew about it. He always claimed that nobody knew. He wasn't going to tell anybody and have that sort of hanging over him. I believe that Mother knew. And if nothing else, I think the doctors might have figured when Becky came along that she'd better not have any more children because she was likely to lose the breadwinner very soon. And for a long time, Father went back to the Cleveland Clinic for his checkups, and after a while he stopped. Because every time he walked in the doors, he was still walking around. How come? And every doctor, every intern, every resident wanted to examine him and find the secret. And Father gave up being the guinea pig to be studied, and he didn't have any help, medical care, except for the doctor who presided over his last years. But he changed his work. One of his best friends, Ann Harvey's, and there's a picture somewhere around of 3 boys, handsome boys, Father standing up, and 2 blonde, handsome, older boys down on their knees or right together. And they were all friends. And one was named Blair, and he ran the terminal, the farmer, what would have been, the farmer's market kind of thing for all the produce that came into Cleveland, and grocery stores and restaurants would come there to buy their groceries. That's I don't know what they called it, but it was in the terminal building downtown. And that was having trouble, and Father helped him get through that. And one of their children was a classmate of mine at Malvern School. Sally Blair had corkscrew curls. Every day she'd come to school with corkscrew curls. And I had my hair shingled in back, straight, flopped over it with a great big bow on it. Oh, I was taken to the barber shop for my haircuts. So trying to think of other relatives I should be talking about. Is that about it?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that enough?
sister.
Oh, my sister.
Yeah.
And a little more about your mom if you want to.
Yeah. Mother was a no-nonsense kind of a person. And she had all these ailments that she didn't let on. She was not a hypochondriac by any means. But she did have hay fever after the Dust Bowl trip. And so we went away every summer, August.
That's why you ended up in Canada.
Yes, we went to Canada, up far enough north to get away from the ragweed. It had to be farther and farther as more and more ragweed seemed to grow in between times. And when we didn't go there, before the war, we went out to California, to the beach in Santa Monica, where we stayed in a club, very fancy club. And grandmother, who lived on the corner of Hollywood and Vine in an apartment, sort of treated us, but it kept Mother away from the mountains. Were just east of Santa Monica and the ocean, and there was no pollen to speak of, and that was a big relief for Mother. When the war was beginning to come and there were a few more sailors around, that last trip I can remember going to see grandmother at her apartment. And we'd go downstairs to the bar, which was in the same building. And in those days, little girls could come into the bar and have a Shirley Temple while their parents or grandparents had their bourbon and water or scotch and water. And we'd walk in, and grandmother would make sort of a grand entrance, and the sailors would all turn around and say, "Oh, hiya, Butch." And that just tickled me to have a grandmother who wore pince-nez and was shorter than I am now, and had big blue eyes and blonde hair, obviously dyed, and probably weighed 100 pounds at the most. To be called Butch was just so neat, and she loved it too. That was she had a good life after she gave up being married to an engineer who was always off working somewhere, always in dull small towns where there was no life. She liked lots of activity, but not intellectual, not artistic, but just fun.
So when you did summers up in Canada, you would go with your mom and your sister? Is that how it worked?
Yes, and Father would come for part of the time. Sometimes he'd come in the middle after we'd gotten settled somewhere. We picked a different place each year. The first time I was taken, I think Becky was left behind, and we went to Lake Bay, something like that, and stayed in a, sort of a B&B kind of a place with a porch where you had your meals and fishing every day, and then trips, overnight trips with tents and things. I don't know. Mother found a way to collect those. We didn't own them. I can remember going fairly late in the season, meaning into September, and we went up to Lake Gogebic. I think that's a big national park. Snow, cold, big waves. Mother gave me Lady Godiva chocolates. They had a cordial in them, liqueur, and a chocolate on the outside. They're the shape of a bottle with maybe 1/2 spoonful of. That was to keep me warm and keep me quiet and calm. And then we got into tent. They put up the tent, and in the rain. And Mother wanted to have a nice, comfortable one. And oh, look at this! It's a nice bed of moss. Will be so comfortable and soft. Well, the rain kept down all night and the water came up from underneath. That was a pretty uncomfortable night, adventure. But Mother got smarter about things like that as we did that year after year in different places.
How did Halcyon Point get into this? I mean, if you were, when did you,
Halcyon Point was something that was bought by Father's father, Alton Bemis, along with 2 or 3 or 4 other lawyers. And they put up a house, and they put up a boathouse, and the Water Witch was the first motorboat in Georgian Bay. We dug the motor out of the bottom of the place where that ice house was and boathouse, and outhouse and gazebo and so on. And I guess they gave up on it, or Hostetler or somebody else was interested. Nobody was interested in the family. Uncle Jack didn't have any kids to take up. Father had it just because it was kind of handed down to him. His 2 older brothers were dead by that time anyway, or nearly, yeah. But they started it up again to get ice chopped during the winter, and they put that in the ice house. And but that would last all summer. You put lots of sawdust around it, pile up big chunks of ice, and that would take care of it. That was where Father went when he was a boy, and into his teens maybe. I'm sure later on we were told by somebody from up there that somebody bought it and moved it across the ice in the winter. So it went to some other island somewhere. Nobody's using it, it was falling apart, so no reason why not. And the rest of it was gone, fell apart. You know, with the waters, nothing lasted that was in the water very long in winter. Most things had to be dragged up on the ground. And so when we went, Father said, maybe you'd like to go up and try it. So we did. And we went one time, just the 2 of us. And then the next time we took Liz, and we had that little cottage built. The first time I think we had a tent.
We
And
slept out in a tent.
Yeah.
Grandma did?
Grandma did.
Wow.
And it was buggy and it was uncomfortable.
It was right on the rocks, because there was
Wow.
no sleeping on the moss. And then you came, and then we had that little cottage cabin built, prefab, and I think it was 20 by 20 with 10 foot for the porch.
Right, it was small.
It was small. There was enough to get 3 people, but not more than that. And then the next time we brought Amy, and we had a tent for you 2, and we slept in the cabin.
As soon as children were toilet trained, they could go to the island.
Well, that wasn't the test exactly.
Because we didn't have facilities for diapers.
Well, but it was more than that. They had to be able to be
Right. But
obey rules.
What?
Right.
You took her?
7.
I think that's about right. But I was worried, because I know Mother used to talk about somebody who lost a child who just fell on the rocks and in just a few inches of water drowned.
How
Not
on earth
down.
did you handle Liz taking Craig and myself around the island?
I don't know. I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't. It was a horror thinking about it, and I worried about it every visit, every trip.
I never wanted to go.
Oh, you did later, didn't you?
No? It was her idea. Craig wanted to go. I didn't want to go, but I kept getting talked into it.
And then we left her behind in her fort. She would build a fort. And Amy liked it better that way. But that's interesting about the island. Okay.
We had an old friend who remembered the Beamises from way back, across at,
Move.
wherever the,
Oh, Deerhead
Deer-
Lodge?
No, the-
Deerhorn.
Deerhorn Lodge.
Deerhorn.
No, he was, well,
Chandler,
yeah,
Oh,
Oh, the ones that ran the boats
yes,
to the island.
they ran the boats back and forth. Mhm.
and then the guy over across at the post office and the store.
Garside
Yes, and there was an old fellow there. who
and Wellington Wells.
Wellington
oh, yeah,
Wells.
I remember
And
him.
he built the bigger cottage, and we walked around and decided where it was gonna be. And it seemed like a good idea to have it farther away from the little cottage so that if one or two of you wanted to go off and have a little privacy, you could. But you always had to have a friend. Now, whether you had a friend, maybe that's why they made you go, so that you'd have a friend with you. But anyway, I didn't worry about Amy, because I didn't think that she would take big chances
I
unless
wasn't
they
big.
talked you into it. And that began to come clear to me, that maybe there's a little of that going on.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, well, she's the one who's gang leader for the whole family.
Well, she started out oldest and she kept that title.